Hello, my crafty friends. This is Christian, also known as Cardigans and Cards, and today I'm bringing you another process video, Craft Roulette, episode 328 that aired on July 17th of 2026. The wheel was spun, and of course, I had to come up with some ideas. We had to make an A2 card with tutti frutti colors, a container, and then an unusual color. I needed some birthday cards, so I decided today I'm going to play with some giant cupcakes and I'm going to do some watercoloring. For the supplies, I'm using Hey Cupcake from Trinity Stamps for that giant cupcake. I'm going to use my Mission watercolors palette, some paintbrushes. A little later on, I'll be using the waffle flower nested ovals for actually making my cupcake. So let's begin. I took two pieces of watercolor paper. I just cut it down so that I would be able to have at least two cupcakes. I will be doing a wet on wet watercolor today. This is a great way to get a background or to do some no coloring, meaning no markers, pencils, or something like that coloring, and still having a lot of bang for your buck on your card. If you're new to watercoloring, I just want to talk about what I have laid out on my desktop here a little bit. I have my palette. In my little eyedropper there, it's just some distilled water, so I can go ahead and reactivate those. I use distilled water for this purpose only because I don't remember to always turn that out or empty it every time I use it. So I know that I won't get any funky growth or smells or anything happening inside my little bottle. Do you need to do that? No. You can just get it wet with your paintbrush in water and mix it up and then just wash your paintbrush over and over again. Or you can just spray it with water from a little spray nozzle. I keep two containers of water. One will be clean water that I'll use throughout the process, and the other one will be just the water that I clean my brush in. I also keep a paper towel near me so that I can blot off anything and pick up anything as an eraser, which we'll see a little bit later. A wet on wet technique is one where the paper is wet and the paint is wet when you put it on. So I am doing the wet on wet technique because I want a very translucent and very tutti fruity, juicy background. For the technique that I'm going for, I want my colors to blend seamlessly and kind of look like they are a cotton candy cloudy technique. To do that, I am just splotching down color. I am putting down the purple currently, and then I'm going to be putting down a pink that's going to kind of mix with that. This is like a pink purple color. I will have the colors listed for you in the description. And I'm just adding those and splotching them in and letting the watercolor do its own thing. Best part about watercolor is it does all the work for you, and you just kind of hang out there and let it go. I continue to add my colors until I get the design look that I was going for, adding water as needed as it evaporates off of the paper itself. I did keep this in real time to really just show you how easy this is if you have not tried it. It's a great way for you to make magic on paper. You can just use plain old Crayola watercolors, or if you have any ink that is water reactive, use that for doing the same technique and being able to paint. It's a great way to expand your color selections as well as making something custom to the color and design that you want without having to invest a ton of time in doing it. I will start to speed this up here in just a few moments, but I just wanted to show that watercoloring is not scary. It's a great medium to work with. And when you're placing down these splotches, you can see I'm not really leaving any harsh lines because I want it to just bloom. By doing that wet on wet, I'm able to have that ink spread everywhere I need it to go. I knew that I for sure was going to get two cards out of this. So I was testing to make sure I had enough on this panel for me to use. One of my favorite things to do is when I'm making these backgrounds, just make extra. It takes very little time and it looks great. My first panel was complete, so I set that aside and I started working on my second panel. I knew for this panel, I wanted it to be bright and poppy. So I knew I was going to use a yellow, an orange, and a pink. So I started laying down my colors, getting it all out there. Sorry, I was playing with the focus there a little bit. And I was doing really good with my orange and with my yellow. And then I was being lazy. I decided to just pull in the pink that was already on my mat, just making it a little bigger because I knew I needed some more. And that's when I made mud. And that's when I said, ooh, that really is not the color I like. And the best part of watercolor is you could just pick it up and erase it really fast and no one will ever know. So why did I make mud? When you look at a color wheel, if the colors are opposite of each other, when you mix them together, they make brown. So I had too much purple in my pink that was with the yellow tone that I picked. Purple and yellow are opposite of each other, and when mixed together, they make mud, also known as brown. Whenever you need a brown, just know if you look at a color wheel, you can mix yellow and purple. You can mix blue and orange. You can do red and green, and you'll make mud. You'll always have brown in your stash at any point in time. After a little cleanup, I wanted to show you the big difference in the colors. Do you see how much lighter this is? Nice thing about watercolor is the vibrancy falls back when it dries. And these aren't even dry. You can still see the water glistening on this paper. I'm going to set those aside and let them dry while we get ready to do some stamping. When selecting my paper that I was going to stamp my sentiment on, I decided to keep it on the same watercolor paper. I made this decision because I was unsure of where I was going to be stamping and die cutting my cupcakes components out of, and I wasn't sure if I was going to have a little white that was showing through. So I put it into my MISTI, did a stamping, didn't use my magnet, then thought, oh, I should put my magnet on there. And then it went amok. Because, of course, why line it up the first time? Why not use the tools they gave you? I really should call this video What Not to Do because I mastered a lot of it. So I restamped the image and again, being lazy, didn't want to get up and get another piece of paper, decided, oh, I could just use the piece that I messed up and had double vision on, and I could just like use that piece. So I cut it off. But I used pigment ink, and I have learned this lesson more than once. I always put a piece of scrap paper down on my MISTI mat so that when I am putting the ink on the ink side of the paper on the MISTI, I'm not transferring that on there and then getting that on my next project or the inside of the card or on the back of the card where I'm going to stamp my logo. I just save yourself the problems and put a little piece of scrap paper there and learn from my mistakes. My sentiments were done and I set them aside so they can just dry. I didn't want to have to heat set them or do anything else fun with it. So that's when I went stash diving. I knew that my cupcakes were going to be nice and bright. You saw the panels, they're going to be bright. But I didn't want just a plain solid background and I didn't want something that was going to compete with my design. So I just found a black polka dot fan pattern paper that was laying in my stash. I know you all have something you could dig into too and find. And I was like, okay, I'm going to use that. I just had to make sure that when I was cutting it, I was cutting it at the correct angle because did, my paper did have a pattern on it and I needed to make sure that it was lining up appropriately. Next up was die cutting. And again, I had used pigment ink. So when I do my die cutting, I want to make sure that I am wiping off my plates. Okay, confession. When was the last time you wiped your plates? You don't have to tell me, but you could put a little comment in the comments below and I'll see if you feel like disclosing that. But just make sure you're wiping off in between times when you're using your pigment ink so that your plates don't transfer that on to the next project. Again, learn from my mistakes. Telling you what not to do. I've done them all. I brought back my panels to see how the drying was going. For the most part, they felt pretty dry, but I knew they were not quite dry enough, especially for me to do any stamping or die cutting of. if you try to die cut the watercolor paper when it's a little wet, you may have more tearing and or you can have lifting if you are placing down any low tack tape and you'll take those fibers right off of there. Watercolor paper does warp naturally, but it also flattens on its own. So when you take a heat tool to it, you're going to see that it's going to curl up and it'll curl up pretty intensely. But then all of a sudden, it'll go right back down flat again. As you can see here, I'm like, oh, this is really curling up. I just flip it over and dry the other side, and then it will flatten it right back out again. Watercolor paper is not going to be as warpy as your paper would be if you're just using regular cardstock and you got water on it. That's the nice thing about watercolor paper. So how do you know when it's dry? When you touch it and it no longer feels cool to touch. And cool to touch, I do not mean by the heat itself. It is when that paper has now gone back to room temperature and you touch it, it should feel cool on your fingers, and that's how you know when it's still wet. I did trim down my water panels just a touch so they'd fit inside the MISTI because, again, being lazy, not wanting to get another stamping platform out, this was already out on the counter. I know y'all can relate. Once I aligned my stamp in the position that I wanted, I did go ahead and stamp that again in that same black pigment ink. And I did have to stamp it a couple times, I think. I can't remember. Um, and that is because water paper is textured. So sometimes you have to do that extra little stamping to make sure you're getting it on all the fibers. Before I stamped, I did pull in a transparency so that I would be able to see where this is going to line up on my card itself. And that is when I start looking at this saying, huh, there's a big open spot there in the middle. I wonder if I could get one more out of here. So I started to do some testing. First, I tried to see, oh, does the stamp actually fit in there? So this is another use for having a transparency or a grid transparency, or if you're old school, yep, I still have a box of transparencies. I make my own stencils out of them all the time. But anyway, you can use those tools to see if stuff lines up and then not get your paper all inky and your fingers all inky. So I am just futzing here, getting my magnet stuck on there. Yeah, sometimes I do things the hard way. But I just want to see if it'll fit. If I die cut, will I be able to get three out of this? Because why not try for one more? And I was successful. I was able to get three out of this, and I got these three cards done in an hour. And I just watched Craft Roulette while doing this. Once I had my liners stamped and I had to clean up my MISTI anyway, I went ahead and stamped one more Make a Wish on some white cardstock and die cut that out with all the other die cutting that I did at the end here. Next up was my frosting. I found the first spot that I wanted to do my stamping in on the paper. And then I started working on my second placement and my third placement. I wanted to make sure I had space to accompany all of the frosting that I needed because this is a little bit different dimensions and my watercolor panel is not quite the same dimensions that I needed. So I knew I had to rearrange things. I brought in my transparency and started futzing a little bit. And I was like, oh, this will be the perfect spot for me to put the frosting, and then I'll be able to put the other one in this corner. Well, that's when I realized my sticky mat on my MISTI didn't reach that full way, and I wasn't going to readjust where I was putting my stamp because I already had it on the platform. So I just removed my mat, shifted it over for a hot second, and then moved it back again so that it was in its normal spot. It worked a lot easier. No cleaning, no shifting, and it saved me some mental chaos. I treated these cards as if I were doing mass production. I did everything of the same at the same time. So now that I had all my images stamped, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to die cut them all. And I just repeat this process just to speed things along. And this would have worked wonderfully if I would have remembered a couple things, like, oh, you forgot to make the cupcakes. So then I went back into my stash and pulled out a light blue paper that I then die cut it with my nested ovals. And I knew that I only had to die cut two of them because I could just cut it in half. And then I would have, well, now four cupcakes for three cards, but math kind of worked. When I did my assembly, I did solely the cupcake liner and the cupcake first alone. I did this because I did not want to adhere my frosting a little too high or a little too low. I wanted my cupcakes to fit my page just right. So by placing my little cupcake in there, I was able to then adjust the size and the height as needed on my panel. When all cupcakes were attached, I went ahead and adhered my patterned cardstock to my card base itself, then added my cupcake onto the panel so I knew where I wanted it, and then adhered my frosting to the cupcake. This allowed me to ensure that I had it in the right spot without having to have something placed down on my paper and become permanent before I wanted it to be. The cupcake was then adhered flat to my card base. I wanted to have my dimension on my Make-A-Wish versus on the cupcake itself. So I did put quite a bit of glue on the back of this because of the little bit of warping that was inside of the paper from the watercoloring. I wanted to make sure that it was as flat as it could be. I did use magnets just to hold that down in place while it was drying. Some foam tape was then stuck on the back of each of the Make-A-Wish sentiments, and those were then adhered to the cupcakes. Finally, I took a little bit of Stickles and put that on the wish portion of Make-A-Wish. Then I still had a little sparkle sparkle for my Make-A-Wish. I did not come into the challenge tonight for the episode to make 3 cards. I started with one idea and knew that that panel would give me so much more. I just didn't know I'd end up with 3 of them. What a great way to make accidental extra cards. Do you accidentally make odd numbers of cards? I know it drives some people crazy, but what you can get, you can get. I'll take what I can out of each piece of paper. All right, I think I got all of the parameters that Mr. Wheel provided me. And I was able to get 3 cards with some sparkle that have some fun watercolor techniques that look very dreamy and very tutti frutti. So let's pull out the my creative companion and see if I actually met the parameters and also to update any of the notes that I need in case I want to make these again. So I have an A2 card. Yep, not one, I did 3. Check, check, check. I have Tutti Frutti. Those colors are very Tutti Frutti to me. The citrusy colors up on top and the berry colors on the bottom. Check. Up next, container. I have a cupcake liner that's holding a cupcake. Check. An unusual color. I made a nice pretty brown, which was a lot of fun, but then also just did a blue cupcake. Doesn't match my Tutti Frutti, so that's a little unusual. I went through and updated and made sure I had all my colorways written down, all the tools I use, so that if I want to make this again, I can do it. Mr. Wheel, you didn't outsmart me this time. If you like this video, go ahead and hit the subscribe button or drop a comment. Hit the like button, all the things. Until next time, my friends, I hope you have a wonderful week.